This is David Dubal, and very pleased to have as my guest Bennett Lerner. Bennett Lerner is a wonderful pianist, and he's here today to discuss with me a topic that I've always been interested in, and that is American piano music. On the label Etc., which is a fairly new label and very interesting, and we'll talk about that in a minute, Bennett Lerner has recorded Aaron Copland, Virgil, Thomson, a wonderful set of 6 preludes by Paul Bowles, Samuel Barber, Leonard Bernstein, and Phillip Ramey. So this is quite an interesting disc, and it's had a real history in your life. Bennett, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
Glad to be here. Yeah, as you said, the record has quite a history. Most of the pieces on this record were the results of a lot of research.
Mm-hmm.
The whole record is a kind of project in uncovering pieces or discovering pieces. So every piece on it has a story.
I like records like that because then they become even dearer to the person that plays. And every time you look at the record, you go back and you say, "Oh yes, Aaron Copland told me this or that," right? And it so happens that Aaron Copland is the first composer on your album on side 1, and I see 2 pieces, Bennett. Proclamation for piano and Midday Thoughts, and I thought I knew all of Copland's piano music.
Right. These are pieces which Aaron finished for me last year. The story is that I have been going up to visit him quite frequently over the past few years, and on the piano was sitting a sketch of one piece, Proclamation. It was the beginning of a large work for piano that he composed about 1973, but didn't finish.
Mm-hmm.
Persuaded him to finish it.
You did.
Okay. He also gave me permission to rummage through his drawers, and so I went into his he has a closet with drawers in it, and that has sketches, piles of sketches, and looked and found this other music, which was a piece for piano and orchestra. Quite frustrating to find out that he had written a piece for piano and orchestra and not finished it, called Ballade. It consisted of the very beginning of the piece and the very end of the piece, with a very beautiful tune that he did use in another piece called An Evening Air. He liked the tune very much. And so I begged him and nudged him and said, "Please, can you do something with this?" So these 2 little pieces, Proclamation, which was from 1973, and the Ballade, which he retitled Midday Thoughts, which was from 1944, Aaron finished. He put a little glue, he glued these 2 parts together of Midday Thoughts, and he put an ending onto Proclamation, and he made them into little pieces.
Mm-hmm. So that's why it took him from 1944 to 1982.
That's right. And he looks at that number and he says, "It's going to look like it took me forever to finish those pieces."
Well, these miniatures were obviously very important to him then, and all these years in between.
Right.
He didn't even know he had that in his drawer, possibly. Is that right?
Possibly. It was a piece that the one Midday Thoughts piece was one he worked on quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There also exists a few sketches for violin and orchestra.
Mm-hmm. Now, are these performances of Proclamation for piano and Midday Thoughts world premiere recordings?
Yes, they are. And I gave the world premiere of the pieces, and the pieces have just been published by Boozy, and Midday Thoughts is dedicated to me. Proclamation for piano is dedicated to Phillip Ramey.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So that's for me, one of the great honors, to have a great composer dedicate a piece to you.
Oh, well, I mean, it's just hearing about it, is thrilling, let alone being the person that's being dedicated to.
I say
Copland is, without a doubt, and I know him and worked with him at WNCN for 1 year when he did a fantastic series every week, one of the greatest men I've ever known. I mean, a truly great man.
Right. Oh, I agree. I think this is a little touch of immortality, that my name is on this piece which has been published, like Count Razumovsky. We don't know who he is, but we remember his name because of the Beethoven quartets.
Well, you now rank with the Archduke Rudolph, who got 13, I believe, of Beethoven's works, including the Missa Solemnis, Hammerklavier, things like that. But of course, we have to remember the difference. The Archduke was a tremendous patron of Beethoven and gave him lots of money. So this is even better. You have a dedication, and you now have a recording of these 2 works, and throughout the program we're going to hear some of this recording on Etc., a new label. My guest is Bennett Lerner, American-born pianist, a student of Arau, and we'll talk about your training and other things. But first, if you don't mind, let's hear both pieces, Proclamation for piano and Midday Thoughts, from this world premiere recording. Bennett Lerner, the artist. You have just heard Proclamation for piano and Midday Thoughts by Aaron Copland, and the artist, pianist, was Bennett Lerner, and I'm talking to Bennett. And Bennett, you are very well known for your performances of contemporary music, but also just as well known for Debussy, Schumann, and so forth, and you had one of the great teachers in the world around.
Oh, yes.
He was some experience for you?
Oh, every lesson was a great, great inspiration that you lived off for months and months and months.
Really?
Yeah.
What a thrilling thing. Now, you also have had other teachers of great importance. Tell us a little of your background.
Well, when you studied with Arau, you also worked with his assistant, Rafael da Silva.
Very fine man,
right,
yes.
Who, in weekly lessons would work on the technique which Arau had developed, which is the technique of using a lot of arm weight and arm motions, very, very relaxed kind of approach to the piano. And I also work with another Arau associate named Herman Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it may sound strange that I still work with somebody, but for me it's good to have always somebody to test things out with and have another pair of ears that I trust, that I can always go to, and it speeds up my work very, very much.
Well, why do you say strange? Because many people do this throughout their whole careers.
Well, but some people say, oh, you're still taking lessons? Aren't you beyond that?
Uh-huh. I see. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I've also worked at Manhattan School of Music, where I did my degrees with Robert Helps, who's a very wonderful contemporary music pianist and wonderful composer.
Yes, he is. Well, you have had lots of good teaching, and you're a graduate of the Manhattan School?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Now, let's get back to this recording. How did you come to record on Etc.? Is this an American company? Tell me about this company.
Etc. is a company based in Holland. It's a small company. It's owned by two men. One is English, one is French. Their interest is in filling in gaps in the repertoire, at least one of their interests. Their other interest is in vocal repertoire. They have now recorded recitals by Renata Scotto and Ellie Ameling. But they're also very interested in slightly unusual repertoire, let's say lesser-known pieces by well-known composers. That's one of the niches that they're filling. Through a series of acquaintances, they heard about a recital I gave where I did some pieces by Paul Bowles, and in the recital where I premiered the Aaron Copland pieces. And they asked me if I could put together a whole package of American piano music, and if so, they would be interested in recording. So they're based in Holland, which is a recording center. They do absolutely first-class recording processing, wonderful studio, wonderful people to work with.
Great.
And for me, for my first recording, it was a wonderful experience because they gave me all the time in the world I wanted, a wonderful piano.
You were in on the editing as well?
I was in on the editing, absolutely.
So you're happy with your product?
Well, pretty much.
Yeah.
You're never 100% happy. I listen to it now and I think, oh, why is that fermata so long?
I know.
But basically, yes.
There's nothing to do about that, I guess. Well, we just spoke about Aaron Copland, 1900, born in Brooklyn. Let's move toward the Midwest for a minute in our survey of American piano music. And he was born in 1896 in Kansas City, and I'm speaking, of course, of the one and only
Virgil Thomson.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you have two pieces here, Bennett, Slow and Smooth and Not Fast, and they're 1923 Sentimental Tangos. Tell me of this search.
All right. Now, when Etc. asked me to put together the package, they asked me to ask Virgil Thomson if he would write a portrait for the record of me.
Uh-huh.
I said, well, I don't know if he'll like that idea or not, but I'll ask him up. I called him on the phone. He got very angry. He said, why should I write another piece just for them? People pay me to write pieces. He said, I have 300 piano pieces that nobody plays, so I'm not going to do it. I said, well, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. Can I come down and look at your music? He said, that'll take you 2 weeks. I said, well, let me do it anyway. So I did go down to his house. I had sort of in my mind decided I didn't want to do a portrait, that I would look for something else, because the portraits are quite popular these days. So I looked and looked and looked through everything, and what I found was one of his earliest pieces, these tangos from 1923. I took them to him. I said, can I have copies of these? They've not been published. He said, oh, you don't want those. Those are ancient history. I said, well, I like them. He said, well, all right, I guess I'm old enough to stand by the sins of my youth. You can take them. So I took them, and I liked them very much, and I thought they were just delightful, and I studied them, and I brought them back to him, and I played them for him. he hated the way I played them.
Oh, really?
He thought it was, as he put it very succinctly, as he puts everything, he said, too much Vienna and not enough St. Louis. Okay? His idea of the tango seems to be a very Midwestern idea, very plain, very straight. Not quite the way they do it in South America, where it's very fluid and flexible. The word tango or the word tangel means kind of languid, in fact. But this is how he wanted. He kept saying, no, take out that diminuendo, take out that crescendo, no, and so on. So I worked very hard.
They weren't in the score?
There was nothing in the score.
I see.
No, the notation is very plain. So I then left, and I came back. I said, well, I'll work on them again. And he said, all right, and when you come back, I'll do a portrait of you. Just completely out of the blue.
He's so mercurial.
Right.
He's so wonderful.
Exactly, exactly. So I came back, and I played the pieces for him, and he said they were much better, although he still was a little suspicious about some of my European shadings, I suppose. And then he said, now you come in, sit, and I'll do a portrait of you. So I sat there. You sit at the opposite side of a table from him, and he has a piece of music paper, and he looks at you once, and then he starts to write a portrait, and he sort of mumbles a little while he's writing, or hums a little. It took about an hour. He got all finished. I said, can I look at it? He says, yes, but you can't say a word. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's just been hatched, and so we don't scramble it yet. You just don't say anything. So I looked at it. It looked quite plain. I came back a couple of days later to pick up a finished copy of it, and I discovered that it's entitled Senza espressione, without expression, with the subtext, please, no diminuendos, no crescendos, no accents, and no retards.
Wonderful. It's a wonderful story.
So in a way, it's not really a portrait of me. If it were, it would be kind of insulting. What it really is, and he agreed with me, is a lesson in how to play Virgil Thomson's music. So, for performance, this is very hard. You learn a piece, and then you go to the composer, and he says, no, it's all wrong, and you don't know quite what to do. You have to work out a solution where you do what you feel will satisfy the composer, but which will also satisfy you. And that's, what I've ended up with these tangos. I don't know at this point, the record has just come out, I don't know at this point how Virgil feels about the performance. I'm waiting nervously to hear.
Well, I know it's had very good reviews.
Oh, yes.
Won an ovation recently and in Gramophone. Bennett, that is a story that is so interesting because every performer that can tell us something about his relationship with a composer always has interest for the performer these days, because the composer is rather a scary object to, especially the living composer. And of course, Virgil's not putting, he knows what he wants, not putting anything in those originals should have been a key almost, that he wanted it that way. But you never know with him.
What finally was the clue for the tangos for me was to realize that what Virgil was hearing as tangos was the way people in the Midwest in the 1920s played tangos.
And we're dancing them.
And we're dancing them.
Very stiffly, yes.
And I have, in the meantime, talked with people from Cuba and from South America, and they say, when they came to this country in the 30s and they heard tango orchestras, they didn't recognize it because it played in a different style. So it's an American version of a tango.
It's wonderful. Let's hear these two sentimental tangos before we hear that portrait of you, by the way, and slow and smooth and not fast. And if Virgil is listening, I hope he likes them very much.
Yes.
from 1923, 2 tangos that Bennett Lerner himself found at Virgil Thomson's apartment at the Chelsea Hotel, right?
Yes.
And it didn't take you 2 weeks to find them. You knew what you wanted, and you have recorded them. Now, getting back to the portraits, and we heard that story, I see that 2 portraits are on your album from 1983. The one of you, which is really the lesson in no diminuendos, and another one of Phillip Ramey Thinking. That's the title. You know, mine is called David Dubal in Flight.
In Flight.
Yeah. And he orchestrated it also.
Mm-hmm.
Was a fascinating
So you are also
experience.
immortal.
Yes, I'm immortal, and this is the most important
Yes.
thing that's ever happened to me, being immortal.
I might mention that these portraits were done just in the week before I went off to record. The portrait of Phillip Ramey I picked up on the way to the airport and practiced it over there in the concert hall, the Concertgebouw, which they arranged for me to practice in. And I learned it there and recorded it. It was almost as if at the last minute Virgil decided he wanted to get 2 more pieces on the record.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did.
Oh, wonderful. So let's hear the portrait of Bennett Lerner and the portrait Phillip Ramey Thinking. Pianist is Bennett Lerner. We have just heard 2 portraits by Thomson, Virgil Thomson, and he has written, Bennett, at least 200 portraits, so you're in good company. Picasso and Gertrude Stein, and of course his great friend, the painter Maurice Grosser, and of course myself.
And these will all be published.
Yeah.
Fact,
He told me that David Dubal and Flight will be published by Boozy and Hawkes, I believe, the end of this year. But you're right, of course, it's such a great feeling to have a portrait done in music by Virgil Thomson, who's a legend. Well, we know that this was made in Holland. Can we get this record easily enough in New York now?
Yes, the record is available here through Qualiton Imports. The stores that I know have it are Tower Records and the various Barnes & Noble stores. They've been doing very well by it. They put it in the window, and it's been selling very well. They displayed it very well.
Well, that's nice. Well, let me see. Should I give the number? That would help. It's of course, it's a stereo digital recording, and it's ETC for the etc. label 1019.
And it is also available on cassette, and the number of the cassette is XTC 1019.
You know that cassettes are selling now better than recordings?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? I never thought that would happen. Now, we move from Kansas City to 1910 when Paul Bowles was born. This is a fascinating man. He is probably better known as an important American writer.
That's right. He's a very curious case. He's a man who started out as a composer and gradually became a writer. And as a writer, he's he's what they call a writer's writer. He's not widely read right now, but good people who know good writing know his work.
Yes.
His most famous novel is called A Sheltering Sky. And at the time that he started writing novels, he began to stop writing music. Before that, as a composer, he was well known as a theater composer. He wrote incidental music for plays of Tennessee Williams and Soroyan. He incidentally studied with Aaron Copland and Virgil Thomson, so he's very much part of their circle. In the 40s, he was always a world traveler, and in the 40s he settled in Morocco and really kind of withdrew from the New York musical scene and continued to publish novels. Now, with putting together the package for the record company asked me if I could find more music by Bowles.
They had heard these.
They heard one piece. I gave a premiere of one piece 2 years ago, the one called Orosi, and they said, well, if I could find more pieces by him, they would be very interested, because there is a renewed interest in his novels now. They're all just now being republished.
And a new one is out now.
And a new one just came out called Points in Time.
Yes.
It's kind of a memoir of Moroccan history.
It's a small novel, and I started reading it yesterday. I was in a bookstore.
No, it's not actually a novel. It's kind of poetic images about Morocco. But his books are all coming back, so there's a little bit of interest growing in him, so I decided I would do that. So there were really two avenues open to me. One was to hunt through the libraries, and I found at the University of Texas in Austin, their Humanities Research Center had a very big collection of Bowles' papers, which accidentally included a lot of his music. Also, I went to Morocco to visit Bowles, and there in Morocco he gave me a couple of pieces and had in the meantime also sent me some pieces. That was quite interesting to go and visit this strange, mysterious person.
And is he strange and mysterious?
No, not at all. He couldn't be more charming and urbane, very elegantly dressed, and was very happy to have somebody from New York come and be able to talk about New York a little bit. And his relationship with his music is very distant, though. He doesn't keep it in very good order. He's occasionally lost pieces here and there. One of the things I'm very happy about with this record is that it kind of preserves some things. So some of the pieces are first recordings, some of them are not.
Which are first recordings?
The first recordings are some of the Latin American pieces, Orosi, which he gave to me in person, and then Tierra Mojada, which he mailed to me later. And the other pieces, we're not sure. His records aren't very good. We're not sure if some of them might also. I might have been the first person to play them. What's exciting for me here is I feel I've kind of rediscovered a composer. I've put him back in the record catalog. I probably am the only person in the world right now playing his music, which is sort of fun, but I hope that will change. Because of this, Schirmer's is going to publish the 6 Latin American pieces and possibly the Preludes too. So I'm very happy to kind of start Bowles in again, because I think the music is wonderful. I hope in the coming year to do a whole concert of his music with chamber music and songs, and especially 2 piano music, which is quite wonderful.
Well, you have really done wonderful things. In fact, this album is really a beginning in a certain way, because you will now be getting to know chamber pieces of Bowles.
Right.
Did he write? There was a recording in the late 50s, I believe, of some piano pieces.
Well,
maybe Leo Smith.
Grant Johannesson recorded the Preludes.
That's right.
And Golden Fisdale played quite a bit of his music back then in the 40s too.
None of this music is dissonant or difficult. It all has, though, a wonderful subtlety, right?
It's very charming. Has slight little touches of jazz sometimes, or touches of Latin American.
So you went to Morocco to meet him.
Right. That's right.
I would say this is dedication.
Well, it was also a nice trip.
Tell me of your impressions of Morocco.
Well, he lives in Tangier, which is not so very interesting, but because it's kind of a Western city. But the exciting part about Morocco was to go to Fez, which
you really think Tangier is a Western city?
Well, by comparison with Fez, which is like a medieval city, you feel you're back in the Middle Ages.
So you liked it?
Oh yes, very much. Unfortunately, I was there during Ramadan, which is this Muslim festival where nobody is allowed to eat, drink, or smoke all day long. So they're all in a very bad temper.
Well, I can imagine. People do amazing things to themselves, you know. Well, Paul Bowles is going to be heard on WNCN now, I really believe, for the first time. That is a wonderful thing in itself. So the New York audience now will be hearing the 6 preludes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the 6 Latin American pieces. Let's listen to Bennett Lerner in these 6 preludes for piano composed from 34 to 45. Paul Bowles, American composer living in Tangier, better known as a writer, was just performed by Bennett Lerner, and they were the 6 Preludes for piano. Bennett, I have to take a break for some commercials. I'll be right back, and we'll talk more about this fascinating American composer that you're bringing back to life. This is David Dubal, and my guest is the American-born pianist, Bennett Lerner. Bennett has recorded an all-American recording of various composers, and we are listening tonight to Copland, Thomson, and Paul Bowles. Also on this recording is the quite amazing piano fantasy of Phillip Ramey, Bernstein's Anniversaries, and a piano work by Barber that I believe was composed for the Clyburn competition, and that's Ballade, and it's a very beautiful piece. So there's so much to hear on your album. You really have it crammed in, and getting back to Paul Bowles, a lot of composers at that time were interested in Latin American rhythms in the United States, weren't they?
Yes, I think Copland was very important in heading people's attention that direction with his Danzón Cubano and other Latin pieces. Bowles was a real traveler. He hardly ever stayed in New York. He was in Bali or in Costa Rica or in Guatemala. So these Latin pieces are actually based to some degree on folk materials, mostly in these cases from Mexico. Or from Costa Rica.
Bowles also was married to the late novelist.
Right, Jane Bowles.
Yes, who many people love her writing.
Yes, she's a wonderful writer.
So, what else of importance? You're going to be doing a Bowles recital with some of the chamber pieces. Did he write a piano concerto?
No, there's a concerto for 2 pianos, though, which, again, Golden Fizzle did play way back when. It exists in a version for chamber orchestra, and also in a version for large orchestra.
Have you heard it?
I've heard it. Yeah, it's wonderful.
You should do it with someone.
I hope to.
Wonderful.
Exactly.
Let me see, what else should I ask you about Paul Bowles? He's a very romantic-looking man from the pictures, the photographs.
Well,
that
he's
I've
quite
seen.
elegant. He's thin and white-haired and very slim and very nice smile.
And he loves Tangier.
He loves Morocco. Yeah. I don't quite understand about living there myself. Because he's so isolated from the musical world, I'll tell a story on him. In Tangier, there's a record store called the Palace of Modern Music. It's a big record store. Of course, what they mean by modern music is modern Arabic music,
Sure.
Egyptian music especially. I was joking, well, there's nobody in here who's ever heard of Appalachian Spring. I made that joke to Paul Bowles, and he said, well, I've never heard the piece myself either, which really shocked me, So he was sent a tape. After I came back, he was sent a tape, and he wrote back saying that he was thrilled to have it, that it was one of the most beautiful pieces he'd ever heard.
And yet he did not have the curiosity through these years to... That's the strange part.
He's a bit passive there. It seems like the world comes and visits him. Everybody passes through Tangiers to see Paul Bowles. It's one of the things you do.
I must do that.
Like Tennessee Williams would go there, or Jean Genet would go there.
It's a shame that when I was there I didn't...
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Next time you go, he receives, as he puts it, at 6 o'clock, and who was ever in town. During the beatnik years,
yes.
he was constantly being visited. People were using his apartment as a crash pad. He complained about it.
Really? How fascinating. What a life. Let's listen then to... Do you want to tell us the titles? Because I certainly can't pronounce them.
Yes, I can explain them a little bit, too.
Explain them.
6 pieces. They weren't written as a set. I put them together in this order as a set. The first one is a huapango. Huapango is this Mexican rhythm from Veracruz, which alternates 3/4 and 6/8. And the next is called El Bejuco. Bejuco is a plant, is a vine in Costa Rica. Tierra Mojada, this is a story. The piece was originally called Iquitos, which is in Ecuador. He changed the title because Iquitos became a popular tourist spot. He said he didn't like naming his pieces after popular tourist spots. So Tierra Mojada means damp earth. Anywhere that the earth is damp, this piece is named after. Then the next is Orosi, which is a town in Costa Rica. La Cuelga means birthday present. The piece was written as a birthday present for Leonard Bernstein. And the set ends with another huapango called El Sol, the sun.
Oh, wonderful. Let's hear the 6 Latin American pieces by Paul Bowles and the performance on Etc. Records by my guest, Bennett Lerner. Bennett, I love those pieces. We have a minute, no more, to say whatever else you want about this record. And I'm so pleased that you have done this all-American recording of piano music, because there are very few American recordings. I mean, American
Is that really
piano.
true?
Yes, very few. Just amazing. Anything else to say?
Well, there's one story to tell on myself. And in the Phillip Ramey Piano Fantasy, there's one note which is played by the composer, because my hands aren't quite big enough for a certain stretch, and he was never happy that I always broke it. So he was at the recording sessions. He oversaw the recording sessions. And so he is playing one note. We had to rehearse it about 15 times to get it right. But there's one note by the composer on this record. So
that is fascinating. Phillip Ramey then has one note in his...
Right.
Oh, it is a very difficult piano fantasy that he composed, and I think it's dedicated to
John
friend
Corigliano.
John Corigliano, and you play it on this. It's a fascinating and, oh my goodness, a difficult work, and he has one note in it.
That's right.
It's characteristic of Phillip, who has, such a tremendous personality, and he's a darn good pianist. He could do more than one note, of course. Bennett, it has been delightful talking to you about this new endeavor of yours and the many other things you're doing. I wish you luck with all of your projects.
Thank you very much.
And it's been good seeing you.
Likewise. Thank you.
This is David Dubal. Thank you for listening.